Welcome to a journey through the eerie and unexplained. In this video, we dive into 4 chilling tales: the ghost of Theater 3, the dark mysteries of the basement, the haunting that gripped Sara, and a ghostly encounter at Squatter's Pub. Brace yourself for a night of spine-tingling stories that will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows. This is a true ghost story. I know that it's true because it recently happened to me. I have always been a skeptic of the paranormal. My mind has always operated in a factual way. I back up anything unusual with proof and simple logic. There has been little in life that I had no explanation for. Ghosts and goblins have always been as real to me as cartoon characters. 3 months ago, all of this changed. The exact date is not important. The incident occurred near the end of August of this past year. It took place between 9 and 11 p.m. I know that it was between this time because this is when I do my usual nighttime usher check of the theaters where I work. The theater I work for is quite tiny, only 3 theaters, a bathroom, and an upstairs office. We show mainly independent and foreign films. The theater has been around since 1972 and still has the vintage, shaggy carpet and laughable orange walls that were groovy back then. Shortly after I acquired the job, I heard of a rumor circulating among various staff members. Apparently, the legend was that an employee had taken his life in the locked staircase of Theater 3 sometime in 1976. There is practically no use for the staircase. It leads to the upstairs office, but there are other more convenient ways to get there, so nobody I worked with had actually been inside. On this particular day, I was working all duties: box office, concession, and ushering. The only people in the entire building were my manager and I. After the last movie had ended, my manager called down to me on my walkie-talkie and asked if I could check out the staircase. Apparently, one of the patrons complained of noises coming from behind the door. I went up to get the key from her. She confessed that she was apprehensive about doing it herself, but assured me that it was probably just a couple of rats. I remember thinking at the time how silly she was to fall victim to all the horror story hoopla. I went down to the staircase without hesitation. I unlocked the door without hesitation. I swung the door open without hesitation. I was truly the naive one, unaware of life's spectacular happenings. As soon as I swung the door open, I felt a sharp, cold sensation sweep through me, as if an open window had allowed a winter breeze to enter. I must admit that I slammed the door shut and took a couple of deep breaths. At the time, I was too proud to succumb to the fake fears and confess my childishness. So I opened the door again, this time much slower. I felt the same cold breeze, only this time it somehow paralyzed me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream. I wanted to at least turn on the lights and see that there was nothing to fear. But I could do nothing. And then it happened. The lights shot on and the door slammed behind me. I fell to my knees and shut my eyes. Before my eyes shut, though, I caught a glimpse of an image at the top of the stairs. I sat there horrified for maybe a minute and then attempted, eyes still shut, to open the door and leave. It was locked. My keys were dangling outside. I knew what I had to do. I have never been so panicked, so frozen, so insanely horrified in my life. I opened my eyes and I saw him. You can watch horror movies and look at true ghost photos. You might even think you can hear them late at night. You might dream of them or fantasize about them, but you cannot see them. I'm trying to say that you cannot see a ghost until you actually come face to face with one. Pale, lost, hideous, young, empty. I just cannot put it into words. He was there, as simple as that. I almost felt like I knew him. He was, well, almost transparent, but like more real than any person I have ever seen. Don't get me wrong, he was revolting to look at, but I could almost tell that he was sad and lonely. Something about his sadness made me not as scared. I gained a little composure and was able to speak. "Are you okay?" I asked. He didn't answer me. He just sort of looked down at the ground and swung his head from side to side. It was then that I caught a glimpse of the side of his head. It must have been the bullet wound, only there was no blood, but half of his skull was missing. I assure you, I flinched back so hard I almost knocked myself unconscious on the door. I think he knew that I was disgusted and it angered him. He began to quickly move towards me. I have never known such fear. And then, there he was. We were standing so close to each other that I could smell his breath. His hand began to creep up as if he wanted to touch me, simply to touch another human being, and then he vanished. I didn't hear my name for a few seconds. Shelley, my manager, had been calling on the walkie-talkie asking why I was taking so long. I still have no idea how I couldn't hear her. The walkie-talkie had been on the entire time as far as I know. I still work for the same theater, and believe it or not, I still check the staircase at least a couple times a week. I have yet to see him again. Maybe he found a new hiding place. Or maybe, just maybe, he came to terms with himself that night. I'd like to think that he had struggled long enough and he paid his price for his cowardly exit from life. I'd like to think that he found peace that night, much as I did. I hope you got something out of my story. I know it sounds quite fantastical and pretty unreal. I understand if you don't buy it. I was the same for a very long time. Maybe one day you will be a true believer as well. Take care and be aware. Andy. Leanne's story begins like a classic tale of hope and fresh beginnings. At the age of 32, single and ready for change, she bought a charming 2-story house in Colorado. It was a bit of an impulsive decision. She loved the house's classic design, spacious rooms, and the peace of its remote location. Naturally, she had heard rumors that the house was haunted. The real estate agent dismissed them as small-town gossip. Leanne wasn't superstitious. She didn't think much of it, feeling excited to finally leave behind her cramped, musty old apartment. She was ready to start a new life in a new town, with a new job, and with the dream of having spacious rooms all to herself. The house was perched on a small hill, overlooking a valley with a few scattered homes. Each house had plenty of space, something Leanne had only dreamed of after years of apartment living. She moved in on a fresh August weekend, enchanted by the airy rooms and the large window in her cozy bedroom. The bedroom faced the valley, giving her a perfect view of the sunrise each morning. She decorated the house herself, placing her 2 most cherished possessions in the basement, a vintage piano and her parrot, Nibbles. She thought both would be comfortable down there, away from the main living areas, where she could play the piano freely and let Nibbles chirp without disturbing anyone. After a few weeks, Leanne loved her new life and her new home, though the large house sometimes felt too empty. She didn't mind living alone, but she thought it would be nice to have some company. She decided to rent out the basement room, but wanted to try sleeping there herself first. She took her blankets and pillows down to the basement to see if it would be comfortable. Once she set up, she placed the mattress in the corner, facing a closet with a rotating clothes rack. From her position, she could see Nibbles' cage and a small part of her piano. After settling in and feeding Nibbles, she drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, Leanne was abruptly awakened. She was usually a deep sleeper, so she thought it might just be the unfamiliar room, but something felt off. There was a faint, banging noise coming from the closet, and she noticed that Nibbles was fluttering wildly in his cage. A wave of nervousness swept over her. She got up and slowly moved toward the closet, each step echoing in the basement's silence. She reached out, and when she opened the closet door, she almost gasped. Her clothes were spinning around on the rack, turning as if someone had just pushed it. Heart pounding, she checked every corner of the closet, then the entire basement, but no one was there. Trying to reassure herself, she reasoned it might have been the air conditioning causing the clothes to move. But then she remembered Nibbles' strange behavior and hurried over to check on him. As she approached, Nibbles began flying even more frantically, banging against the cage and repeatedly calling, "Uh-oh! Uh-oh! Uh-oh!" Leanne's heart raced. Nibbles only repeated this phrase when he felt threatened, and she had never seen him this terrified. A creeping sense of dread filled her, making her aware of every shadow and creak in the room. Then, while still trying to understand Nibbles' strange behavior, she heard it, the sound from the piano. A slow, haunting melody filled the air, soft yet unmistakable. In stunned disbelief, she turned to look at the piano. The lid was open, and the keys were pressing down on their own, as if an invisible hand were gliding across them. Each note echoed with a cold, chilling resonance, sending shivers down her spine. She couldn't see anyone, but the melody continued, eerie and hauntingly beautiful, making her skin crawl. That was the last straw. Terror overwhelmed her, and she bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. She ran outside, heart pounding, and didn't stop until she was in her car, hands shaking as she held the keys. She took a deep breath, started the car, and sped down the hill, needing to put as much distance as possible between herself and the house. In her rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the house. The front door, which she had left open, slammed shut. The curtains in the large window pulled themselves closed, as if someone, or something, was watching her leave. Leanne drove down the winding road until she reached a neighbor's house about half a mile away. Shaking, she knocked on the door and asked if she could stay the night, claiming her air conditioning had broken. The neighbor, startled by her appearance but sympathetic, let her in. But despite the comfort of a safe place, sleep was out of the question. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that haunting piano melody echoing in her mind. In the following days, Leanne avoided her house, returning only during daylight to pack a few essentials. She kept telling herself she'd go back when she felt braver. But each time she considered it, a cold dread held her back. She quietly sold the house, not wanting to recall the memories or mention the rumors that had unsettled her in the first place. A young couple bought the house after her, drawn to its charm, but within a year, it was back on the market. When friends asked about her experience, she would shrug and say it might have been a burglar or a squatter, not wanting to seem superstitious. But in private, she confided to her closest friends that she was certain of one thing: it was not a person. Something else had been in that house with her, and whatever it was, it did not follow the rules of the living. The protagonist, a young man in his 20s, recounts his special relationship with Sara, a beautiful girl with a supermodel-like appearance. Though his friends all said she was not suitable for him, he was captivated by her charm and mystery. From the beginning of the relationship, there were a few odd things he noticed but chose to overlook. Sara always insisted on spending the night at his apartment rather than inviting him to her place. Initially, he found it quite endearing. He thought she simply felt more comfortable in his space. Perhaps she was a bit shy, or maybe she simply preferred the cozy ambiance of his apartment. But over time, he began to notice her firm determination to keep her private life separate from him. Now looking back, he realized he had ignored those early warning signs. One night, after he got drunk and couldn't drive himself home, Sara, who had been with him, reluctantly invited him to spend the night at her house. It was his first time visiting Sara's home, and as he stepped through the door, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. Her house was simply yet tastefully decorated, but there was an odd, cold stillness to it that he couldn't quite explain. Around 4 a.m., he was jolted awake by a terrifying scream echoing through the house. Heart pounding, he fumbled to turn on the light. When he did, he saw Sara lying beside him, still asleep. He gently shook her awake and asked if she'd had a nightmare. In response, Sara seemed indifferent and simply said, "There it goes again," as if she were accustomed to these mysterious screams. Her reaction unsettled him deeply, but neither of them brought it up the next day, and he decided to let it go. A few weeks later, because of heavy snowfall and slippery roads, he and Sara ended up staying the night at her house again. This time, when he entered, he was shocked to find the place in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, and her belongings were scattered across the floor as if someone had broken in and vandalized the place. When he tried to call the police, Sara stopped him and casually said, "This happens sometimes. It's no big deal." Her response scared him, but he couldn't convince her to explain further. He felt there was something terribly wrong, but Sara just wanted to go to sleep and avoided all his questions. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, he was awakened by a strange sound coming from Sara's lips. At first, he thought it was the wind or some distant noise from outside, but then he realized it was coming from Sara. Her lips were moving, producing a low, guttural sound. Not words, but something dark and unrecognizable, like a sound from another realm. He turned on the light, and a horrifying scene appeared before his eyes. Sara was floating above the bed, as if lifted by an invisible force. Her eyes were wide open, empty and lifeless, staring blankly into space, while her body convulsed slightly, as if in a trance. He called her name, desperately trying to pull her out of this terrifying state, but she didn't respond. Her vacant gaze seemed to pierce right through him, making him feel as though he was the one who didn't exist in that moment. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he sat there, frozen in fear, watching her suspended in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her body gradually lowered back down to the bed, her breathing returning to normal as though nothing had happened. She lay there in complete stillness, and though her ordeal had ended, he sat by her side, unable to move, his heart racing. When the morning light seeped through the window, he quietly dressed and left Sara's house without saying a word. The events of that night haunted him, replaying in his mind over and over. He felt as though he had witnessed something beyond human comprehension, something dark and supernatural. He decided he couldn't see her again, couldn't risk being drawn back into whatever strange and terrifying life she was hiding. That day, he blocked her number and distanced himself, avoiding all contact. Surprisingly, Sara didn't attempt to reach out to him either. It was as if both of them silently understood that their story had come to an end. A few weeks later, he heard from a mutual friend that Sara had transferred jobs and moved to the West Coast. He was relieved, hoping that whatever had plagued her would stay behind, that she might find peace, and that he could finally let go of the memories. Deep down, he knew Sara was a good person, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something unspeakably sinister had attached itself to her life, lurking in the shadows. It was a darkness he would never want to revisit. The memories of their time together would occasionally resurface, especially on quiet, solitary nights. He would recall her vacant eyes, her body levitating above the bed, and that terrifying scream that shattered the silence. And each time, he would remind himself never to look back, to let Sara and the secrets she carried fade into the past. Whatever forces had surrounded her, they were beyond his understanding, and he had no intention of ever seeking them out again. The story begins with a man recounting a bizarre supernatural experience while having lunch with his wife Jane at a popular restaurant in Salt Lake City called Squatters. The restaurant, located in an old historic building, is well known for its delicious food and quality beer. But it's also rumored to be haunted, something the man only half believed. The main dining area of the restaurant was bright, bustling, and welcoming, with no hint of anything sinister. As the couple enjoyed their lunch, the thought of ghosts felt like a distant, amusing rumor. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, the man decided to stop by the restroom before they left. Jane waited near the exit while he made his way toward the basement. To reach the restroom, he had to go down a long, narrow staircase, the kind that creaked slightly with each step. The walls of the stairwell were lined with old black and white photos of the city from decades ago, showing streets crowded with people dressed in early 20th century fashion. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the photos, but they also contributed to a slightly eerie atmosphere as he descended alone. The basement was dimmer than the main floor, and an odd, musty smell hung in the air. The man couldn't help but feel a slight sense of unease as he walked down the narrow hallway. He wasn't usually superstitious or prone to paranormal thoughts, but there was an almost palpable heaviness in the air. He brushed it off as nerves, attributing the feeling to being in an unfamiliar, isolated space. As he approached the restroom, he suddenly noticed he wasn't alone. Standing close together in the hallway were two women. They were beautiful, almost unnaturally so, and seemed entirely absorbed in each other. The women were holding hands and leaning in close, sharing a kiss. Although he was no stranger to seeing couples in public displays of affection, he felt strangely uncomfortable, a little shy. He deliberately looked away, not wanting to intrude, and quickened his pace to reach the restroom. Inside, the atmosphere changed immediately. The restroom was small, cramped, and dimly lit, with only a faint fluorescent light casting an eerie glow. The space felt claustrophobic, containing only a sink, a urinal, and a single toilet stall. The silence was heavy, pressing in on him as he went about his business. As he finished, he heard a strange sound, a faint rhythmic clacking coming from the stall. It sounded like the movement of toilet paper, as if someone were tugging at the roll repeatedly. He hesitated, wondering if there could be a mouse, but the restaurant seemed far too clean for something like that. Curiosity got the best of him, and he took a step toward the stall. But as he did, an overwhelming feeling washed over him, a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't a sound exactly, but it was as though a silent scream had erupted inside his head. "Get out of here!" Though he didn't hear it with his ears, every sense in his body screamed the words at him. Paralyzed by fear, he felt an icy chill crawl up his spine. His heartbeat quickened, and a flood of adrenaline surged through him. Not wanting to stay a second longer, he threw open the door and bolted out of the restroom, his heart pounding. As he entered the hallway again, he realized the two women were no longer there. The silence of the basement felt heavier now, suffocating, and the urge to leave grew stronger. The command, "Get out of here," still echoed in his mind, as if the unseen presence was growing angrier. He hurried along the hallway, feeling as though something invisible and menacing was following him, closing in with each step. The sense of dread intensified, and he found himself walking faster, then breaking into a near sprint up the stairs. When he finally reached the top of the stairs, he saw that Jane was waiting at the top of the stairs, her face etched with concern. She asked him if he was okay, sensing something was wrong. He tried to brush it off, but couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. Instead of answering directly, he asked her if she had seen anyone else come up the stairs, particularly the two women. Jane looked at him strangely and shook her head. "No," she replied. "No one's come up besides you." Her answer sent another chill down his spine. He took a deep breath, not wanting to explain everything there in the restaurant. "I'll tell you in the car," he said quietly, and they left without further discussion. As they walked to the car, he finally recounted his experience, describing everything he had seen and felt. Jane listened intently, her expression a mixture of concern and fascination. When he reached the part about the two women, he paused, trying to recall every detail. In his mind, they were wearing floor-length dresses and feathered hats, the kind of attire he'd only ever seen in vintage photographs. The realization dawned on him slowly. These women hadn't looked like anyone he'd see today. They seemed like they belonged to another era, oblivious to his presence, as if he had stumbled into a scene from the past. The thought left him with a quiet, unsettling anxiety. He felt as though he had glimpsed something he was never meant to see, something that shouldn't exist in the present. His thoughts spiraled further as he wondered if he had somehow crossed into another time, just for a brief moment, or if he had witnessed echoes of souls trapped in a place beyond the living.